What's up, everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of Curiosity Theory. We're going to be addressing the science illiteracy epidemic, how to become more science literate, and maybe some approaches to use so that you can be better at sifting through all the misinformation that's out there on the internet.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in. Curiosity Theory.
All right, so Dakotah, we have some things to talk about here, man. It's an interesting time in history right now. It's an interesting time to be a scientist or to like science, right? We have a lot of science misinformation being propagated in society. We have the underfunding or defunding of science research happening. This is just an interesting universe to come out of your PhD program into, right? How does that feel to be a PhD, a recent PhD in this time period?
Yeah, I think it's pretty wild, especially with some of the budget cuts to science funding that this administration is proposing and enacting. I've got a lot of colleagues that are being defunded, having projects that they've been working on for years get defunded. A lot of universities have hiring freezes. A lot of missions, ongoing NASA missions, are being defunded, and it's pretty upsetting. Also, just as a citizen, even bipartisan, left or right, it's hard to imagine where are we trying to go by defunding science as a country. It's a bit bewildering to me.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like there's an underlying objective here of you have this mass public that both mistrusts and is constantly inundated with conspiracy theories, misinformation, skepticism, and you decide you want to start a TikTok page and start communicating science to everybody. Maybe before we get into all that, what's your why with this? Why did you decide to do that in a time like this?
I like doing science communication regardless of misinformation or what people are or aren't saying. That doesn't really matter to me. I love space. I love the universe. I love thinking about how all this stuff is related and how we can figure out the nature of reality and the laws of physics. And so I just wanted to talk about that. I really encounter the sheer amount of misinformation, disinformation through being online and, having to debunk completely ridiculous claims or people who are kind of misrepresenting studies and that sort of thing. So it's, it doesn't, correcting misinformation is not why I wanted to be a science communicator, but I guess it comes with the territory at this point.
I think that, I too have a love for science communication. I think I've decided to approach it in a slightly different way. My whole thing has been doing it in these larger productions, working with PBS, Discovery Channel. I got to work with Al Roker to try to communicate these things.
Al Roker?
Al Roker Entertainment. That was my second science show I ever hosted. It was called Forging the Future. Mm-hmm. And it was actually very space aligned. We were trying to figure out what the technologies that were being invented today that would help us to go to the moon or Mars. And so we visited all these different places, Mars Desert Research Center in Utah, and we went to this Brooklyn lab in New York where they're building these ice houses, these 3D printed ice houses. Al Roker Entertainment produced it. Yeah, so got to work with all these kind of leading figures on these larger science projects to communicate science in a slightly different way, but I think both of them have been affected, right? Just at the beginning of this year, I actually shot a pilot for a show for PBS a while back, and they came back around and said, "Hey, Justin, we actually want to take this to a series. We want to fund the rest of the episodes." And right before I went on my trip to Thailand, we found out that the NSF's budget, the National Science Foundation's budget, was cut for the stuff that I was supposed to make, and so they just didn't have any money anymore. So we couldn't make the show.
Yeah. I mean, it's not good. One thing that I've noticed now that's I think really alarming is that the nature of mistrust and distrust in science, which I think really ramped up after COVID, and all the misinformation around that, and honest mistakes. I think they were probably made by scientists, people making decisions, because it's You know, there's no blueprint, right? Science does not mean this is the answer for everything. Here's the perfect path to go. That's actually sort of antithetical to what science is. Science is like you're trying and you test something and then you iterate. And like by definition, nothing is ever perfect. By definition, no theory is ever complete. It's not possible, right? You can never come up with the perfect theory. There's always more to learn. And now it seems like, in some sense, expertise is held against you. I'll make a video about something as monotonous and obvious as the Earth being spherical. An oblate spheroid is the technical geometric term. And, you know, people will tell me that I'm brainwashed, I'm indoctrinated. Having a PhD in astrophysics is like evidence that I'm not an expert.
Right. You're just a cog in the wheel. You're a part of the system.
Just a perfect little gear getting my little notches turned by them, who is like NASA or the government, they. And it's really interesting to see the way that people think about this. And I think that it stems naturally from a mistrust of the government, a mistrust of authority, which makes sense. You know, I'm a black man in the United States of America. I could think of a couple reasons, perhaps, that we should be skeptical before just like blindly trusting authority and assuming that everything is working in favor of the good of all.
Yeah, I think really quick, I want to mention there's a few scientific studies, right? Like the Henrietta Lacks experiments or the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, right? These are historic incidences where we've literally been like taken advantage of by academia and our government, like for the progress of science, like black people as a whole.
Human rights violations. You know, if the Tuskegee experiment where they knowingly infected black men with syphilis, didn't tell them, allowed them to like go home to their partners, have kids, all of these things. They have kids that are born with congenital syphilis. It's like if we caught wind of somebody doing this to a country that they had beat in war or something like that, these would be like war crimes that there would be international trials for, and people would be held, would be held accountable at the highest possible level. And this is just like something that happened, you know? And I wonder how many other insane, unethical medical experiments like that just haven't been talked about, haven't been uncovered, are like locked away in files people don't know about. Right. Because these are a couple of examples that are sort of within the popular discourse.
Right. And I think the family of Henrietta Lacks, I think, just recently received a payout. Like after that whole big, film came out about the family and all the stuff that they went through. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, there is a reason, I think, for general public mistrust of authority figures. And there's many reasons, right? But I think like entirely denying the validity of the scientific method just doesn't feel like the adequate solution.
Right. Those things don't track, right? You can't, it's not that all science is evil, right? We can definitely pinpoint all different types of ways. I mean, one of the first major goals of Western science was to like demonstrate with conclusive evidence a racial hierarchy, where they would, phrenology, which is at the time was thought of as like some, new advanced white way to do science and show that black people's brains are closer to monkey skulls or so, you know what I mean? And it's obviously been discredited, but that was a major goal early on in science. All these ideas have been disproven scientifically at this point, which again, in my opinion, speaks to the validity and the efficacy of science, because bad ideas over time just won't hold up.
So let's unpack that, right? For someone in the audience listening that maybe doesn't fully understand the scientific method and how information is peer-reviewed, refined, tested, hypotheses are disproven. Like, can you maybe walk me through that process?
Yeah. It's important too, because science is not this black and white thing. So I'll give you an example. In my field, I'll go out and make some observations. Those observations, we're starting the scientific method in the middle. It's not like a start and an end. It's a consistent loop. But let's just say I hop in here. I think that this thing may be interesting. I go look at it with a telescope. I make these observations. I figure out what my uncertainties are. I try to come up with some interpretation. I see if it fits in with previous theories, models, and then we say, you know, like, what is this new thing that we've learned here? So then I submit my paper to be peer reviewed. A couple other experts in the field who are anonymous, supposed to be anonymous, will look at my work, check my methods, and this is an expert in my niche. So they know whether or not we're doing what is standard practice, and they'll come back with some comments. You should prove this a little bit more. You've made a conclusion here that I don't really think is fully supported by what you did. We'd like to see you beef up this area or beef up this area of the analysis.
Yeah, I'm going to pause right there really quick. So I think that that's interesting because that's a constructive part of the process, right? This critiquing of your work is actually generally helpful. Like, you as a scientist appreciate that. I remember there was an incident recently where Terrence Howard was on a podcast talking about some of his scientific theories. And I think Exactly. So he described his experience with Neil deGrasse Tyson, I believe, where he submitted this white paper to Neil for peer review, and Neil basically like ripped it to shreds. Yeah. And then everyone was coming for Neil, like, why are you shooting this man down? And Neil was like, well, no, this is how science works. Yeah. Right. So, all right. So, walk me back to the rest.
That's a good point. And I mean, it's fine that we talk about that, because a lot of that, the sentiment that people who, for example, don't maybe have a deep physics education or something like that, they hear the ideas that Terrence Howard was saying, and they're like, oh, well, this is maybe interesting. I have an open mind towards it. I have, you know, maybe the scientists should listen to these new ideas. And it really is a lack of context of like what new ideas are relevant. What do you really have to do to poke holes in existing theories? First of all, you have to understand them. You can't tell 100 years of science that is progressively like narrowed down on what we can, I'm going to, for the sake of this conversation, call an objective reality, and say, without any understanding of any of those theories, actually, this is all wrong. It's all like the flower of life, whatever the thing is that he's saying. Like, I don't really remember what he was saying. Of life. He was just going, but what he was doing was saying words that if you don't know the context of the field, you're like, oh, these are all words that I really don't understand. This is going over my head. He's a captivating guy, right? He's an actor. He is a professional entertainer. And in my opinion, he basically was embodying an early version of ChatGPT that knew all the right words to say, but didn't really know what they meant and couldn't contextually put them in the right order to describe the right phenomena. And that's what he was doing. Now, if you don't understand science, you're like, damn, this is like a mind-blowing conversation that Terrence Howard and Joe Rogan are having. Right. Now, and if you understand it, then you're like, no, it's not. Neither one of them know what they're talking about. Joe Rogan is confused because Terrence Howard is speaking nonsense.
But I think also there are concepts that Terrence Howard is describing that Joe Rogan is just like maybe not entirely privy to or not that well versed in. And so he's not really able to review his work or the things that he's saying in like a constructive or even like critical way.
For sure. But I think he did something cool. He had somebody come on that was that has I believe a PhD in mathematical physics. A guy, I forget his name. His last name is Weinstein or Weinstein, and it's not Harvey.
Okay,
a different Weinstein, and he came on and did a version of an in-person rebuttal to some of the ideas. And I mean, it was like they were fine and pleasant to each other. But I've seen things that Terrence Howard has said afterwards, and there's like this rejection of even critique to your ideas. But just because you say something that's new and sounds cool doesn't mean that it is a respectable idea in a scientific sense or in an evidence-based sense.
I think that's such a dangerous that specifically is what's dangerous, right? When we think of something like Elizabeth Holmes and the Theranos scandal, she claimed that one drop of blood, which may technologically be possible at some point in the future, with one drop of blood, we can determine all of these, biological indicators about our health, how we're going to live, all these crazy things, and raised billions of dollars and ended up in jail as a result of these fallacious claims that she was making at the time. But, this is a real danger that like kind of everyone is exposed to. And I think it's even exacerbated by kind of everybody just having a platform on social media. You kind of don't know who to trust. And the people that are most compelling a lot of times will get your attention and earn your trust because of their confidence and their ability to act on camera.
Right, and to construct a narrative, which is super important for humans, is a narrative to latch onto. I know we've talked about this before, but there are some evolutionary psychology hypotheses that one of the important things holding together humanity and society is our ability to believe in these wide-ranging narratives that don't seem to have any physical evidence, any physical manifestation.
Right, like money or countries or
if everybody,
companies.
Exactly. If everybody in this country agrees that $1 is worth 100 pennies, then you can have an economy that's based on the value of $1. But if you have a country where that value tanks and nobody trusts it anymore, then you no longer have it. In both cases, it's a rectangular piece of paper with no intrinsic value, but there's this fictitious value that everybody agrees on.
Right. Right. So, I mean, I think this is so interesting to me because I think, both of us, but I'd say even you more so, are on the front lines of this kind of battle of education. It's like war on people's minds, where it's one, you're battling with people who are posting whatever they want to post and other kind of crazy videos to get people's attention. And you're over here trying to talk about exoplanets, and you're seemingly doing a great job still somehow. But the people that are maybe trying to communicate other things are incentivized to communicate whatever they're communicating. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. So, if we think about TikTok, creators get paid by views basically. And TikTok has a couple different programs. There's a creators program. There's this additional reward that goes to it, where if you make a video that's over a minute that gets considerable viewership, you get an additional bonus. And then they also have this other program that's called the Special Rewards Program. Mm-hmm. And this is specifically for quote unquote learning content.
Okay.
Now, who determines whether an account is making learning content? Is the content accurate? Is it is this true information?
So nobody's fact checking this.
Who would be doing it? Why would, what is the incentive for TikTok to fact check anything?
Right.
What's the incentive for them to downrate or downweight rather an account that's posting nonsense conspiracy theories,
if it's getting
an insane amount of views? In fact, what is the motivation of the owner of that account, that content creator, to post anything that's been vetted when the most insane, fantastical ideas are the ones that people latch on to? And people use this for learning. I mean, this is literally a part of the TikTok education program, and I think that this is all political. TikTok was facing a ban for a long time, right? And one thing that they could do to try and flip the perspective of TikTok just being this app where people get on and do dances and that sort of thing is to make it seem like this is a place where people are going for education, to bring value. And I think even paying creators more was them leveraging, again, politically, the app as something that many people rely on for paychecks. So if they're paying their creators more and lots of people are making more money and they can say that there's an educational component, they kind of build a case for themselves to be more of a staple and an important piece of the fabric of, society in some sense, or the American economic system, or however you want to paint it. And ultimately, they are pouring kerosene on the misinformation thing, which it's not TikTok's fault, right? I think it just kind of came with the internet. We all thought that the internet was going to be this thing where everybody is going to have instant access to the best information. And that's really not what happened.
Right. Everybody just has access to information in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, the algorithm isn't prioritizing factual correctness, nor is it incentivized to. So I just want to make sure that I'm on the same page with what you're saying. Are you telling me that, let's say, okay, you're an astrophysics educator online. I could start a page being another astrophysics educator, say whatever wild things I want to that get as many views as I want them to get, come up with all kinds of BS theories about the origins of the universe, and I can get paid a lot more than you by teaching people about things that are factually incorrect.
Oh, that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens, and that's why you oftentimes see people who do have more science backgrounds, maybe like higher degrees, that sort of thing, content creators, going in and debunking or like correcting the wrong things that are said. I mean, they're almost always, not always, it's very easy to make a mistake. I've made mistakes in my content before. And this is a bit of a side note, but I was saying earlier that science is not like black and white. Everything is not so easy. Experts disagree on things, right? There are like factions of exoplanet experts who disagree on like what water worlds are like, or like what's possible and what's not possible. And so, it's hard to always know exactly what's right. And the reason why I say that is because I made a video correcting some random person that was talking about the K218b discovery, where they claimed to have found biosignatures, and they're Earth-like biosignatures, which is a little bit weird if you think about it, because the planet is nothing like Earth. So if you think about looking for Earth-like biosignatures, you're looking for them in a place that's nothing like Earth, but you're assuming that the life is Earth-like because it's producing Earth-like biosignatures, right? And I think that alone is like an interesting line of questioning as to what you should be looking for or what you actually found. Anyways, the guy was like, he butchered the delivery and the analysis of the results, but somebody left a comment on that page or on that video, which was, how can I get better at debunking these things or like fact checking them myself? And that's a really hard question. This is why it's such a hard problem. Yeah. Because what I would tell you is, well, first go read the article at least that is, being thrown up on the green screen. But that's not really sufficient, because that article was written by a journalist who is not a scientist and is trying to write a clickbait article.
It's like so that secondhand communication.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're trying to get views on it. And then I would say, well, within that article, if it was done the right way, should be embedded the citation to the original, the actual source, the research paper. So go look at that. But you're probably not going to be able to even read that unless you are an expert in that field. And even if you go through the abstract and can get the gist of it, you don't have the context to know like whether or not these methods make sense. Mm-hmm. And I have a perfect example of this. There was I don't know if you've seen this. I think you probably have, but there was an article and kind of like a viral moment of JWST finding evidence that we live in a black hole.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So what that really was a single author. Important to point out, this is one person who published an article where he found that galaxies in the early universe seem to be rotating preferentially in one direction. Now, that's a hard measurement to make anyways, but you think of a galaxy rotating, how would you see a galaxy rotate? Like, how do you think, why do galaxies rotate? Let's just like build it from the bottom up.
I would say that it's a byproduct of some spinning that's happened early in the origins of the universe.
Yeah, it's like angular momentum is conserved. Mm-hmm. But like in general, the sun goes around the Milky Way because the sun is a gravitational body.
It's gravitationally
right?
bound.
And so it's just orbiting. Mm-hmm. Well, it takes 200 million years for the sun to complete one orbit. So like, how do you measure a galaxy spinning? It's spinning at such a relatively slow rate per the types of observations that we can make over the courses of nights. So it's not like you're seeing it move. Now, that's a hard measurement to make. And this is essentially the measurement that is reported in this paper with a single author who, if you go through the methods, and you wouldn't know to do this unless you were an expert, he cites almost exclusively himself throughout the paper.
I like this.
So we have a single author that is citing himself everywhere. Now, there's not anything inherently wrong with that. I don't, I can't say that, the method that he did was wrong. I haven't read the original paper, but it's like, that's the level of sort of detailed rabbit holing that you're going to have to do to get to the bottom of whether or not the methods were even accurate. And that's like a difficult thing. Nobody has time to do that.
Right. That almost sounds like a solvable problem, though, with maybe artificial intelligence or some kind of other technology-driven solution that could maybe parse through these papers in an efficient way and translate them to people and make them understandable? I think that's a really tough challenge, though.
I don't know, though, because an AI that goes through, let's say an LLM, that can go through and it has it has sufficient training so that it understands all these techniques and everything, blah, blah, blah. Like, how does it know to be 78% skeptical because this author cited himself a bunch of times? Right? How does it know to go through, and you know what I mean? Like, there is no like easy, clear answer there.
I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all.
100%.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I agree with you in principle, but the idea is we could probably sic 100 astrophysicists across fields, maybe make them all galactic researchers, extragalactic researchers, and some people would be like, I don't think anything's wrong with this. Some people would be like, you're kind of making conclusions you shouldn't be making. The interpretation that this person landed on was that maybe we live inside of a black hole. And at the onset of the universe, there's like some initial angular momentum because the black hole is spinning, right? And like, that's the interpretation. There's so many potential interpretations. Right. You don't even need to think of a black hole. What if just when the Big Bang happened, the universe had, like, it just happened and it had some initial movement in the rotational direction? You could explain it by that. You could explain it by these measurements not being off, or being off a little bit.
I do agree that the complexity and nuance of that is really hard for the public to have the capacity to grasp on a very particularly niche subject, right? And so, you think of this idea, like how does a person then, how can we expect the public to become science literate? Because it's like if all these forces are working against, it doesn't seem like there's many forces except for maybe like you and the PBS shows that we used to make, like circa 2024, but they're no longer funded.
Yeah, I mean, and those get poorer viewership than like the latest conspiracy theory about space.
Right.
That'll, somebody make a 3-minute video that gets 10 million views.
Yeah.
What PBS show these days is getting 10 million views?
Yeah. Now, the other thing that I do think does get viewership that is also not factually correct, but an interesting approach is science fiction, right? Like, I know Interstellar is your favorite movie, right?
All time. Yeah.
And there's hundreds of millions of people all over the world have seen this movie and other science fiction. And I'd say Interstellar is not like the hardest of hard sci-fi, but it is definitely like more hard sci-fi than Star Wars. When you think of like they trying to take basically a factual-based science and then make an extrapolated prediction about where the technology could go. And so maybe that's like again, I don't think they do it perfectly in Interstellar, but I'm saying, look, science fiction is getting a lot of eyeballs. Maybe that's an effective way to try to distill more public understanding of science, to people, and wrap it in this narrative.
Yeah. Well, Kip Thorne, who was the scientist that they consulted for the movie, like a renowned, one of the most famous physicists of all time, wrote a book about the science of Interstellar, where he kind of breaks things down and the accuracy, which is very cool. And I would encourage anybody to check it out if you've seen the movie. But we can, like, even that movie, we can look at something like the idea of a black hole planet, which Miller's planet, the planet that was covered in water, which is not exactly a water world. This is not what
right, because they were walking on it, right?
Right.
So it's
this is like it's like an Earth-like rocky planet with a big layer of water on top of it, but it's not it's not a planet that's significantly composed of water, which is what we think of, at least when exoplanet researchers are talking about water worlds in headlines or whatever. And okay, so you have this planet that's orbiting a black hole. They're called planets. We've never found one because it would be exceedingly difficult to detect because black holes don't give off light, right? But, theoretically, there's no reason why you couldn't have one, and I'm sure that they exist out there. Now, on that planet, what would it actually be like? So you remember that it was daytime on the planet, if you will. But why, how? Why is it daytime? Where's the light coming from? It doesn't orbit a star, it orbits a black hole. Yeah. Oh, well, the black hole has an accretion disk of material, which gets superheated and glows. Okay, that would allow you to see on the planet, but if it was glowing, that's because it's putting out such an extreme amount of radiation across the electromagnetic spectrum all your electronics would be fried. You would instantly be killed. So, it's like a vessel for science communication or like imaginative, creative thinking about the future. Yes, but it's like it's hard for me to say that they like did a good job with like real science communications.
And I guess how good of a job do they need to do, right? Like everybody doesn't need the nuance of a PhD level researcher on these topics to like navigate their daily life. But I do think like there's a general threshold of science literacy that would benefit most people, right? And
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Like just even like I think one of the most important things for people to understand, we've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but just the scientific method itself, how it works, how peer review works, understanding that scientists are wrong about things, like the knowledge that we've derived aren't these like irrefutable pillars of information that these like old white guys came up with hundreds of years ago. Like there's always new science coming out that's changing what we think about things and disproving things actively, you know?
A great example of that is you've probably heard at some point that the Milky Way is going to collide with the Andromeda Galaxy in like a few billion years, something like that. And anybody who's a space science communicator has made a video talking about that or has answered somebody's question about that. Well, a paper recently came out that analyzed the Andromeda Galaxy and its motion, and now they say that it's like 50-50. Maybe it'll hit, maybe it won't. And that's really interesting because it almost seems straightforward. Like you can tell if I'm moving 10 miles per hour north and you're up 10 miles, but also 10 miles west, and let me try not to confuse myself, and you're moving 10 miles per hour, in 1 hour, we should crash in the middle. That's like pretty easy. If you know exactly the direction I'm going and exactly the speed I'm going, and the same for yourself. But galaxies' motion is not that simple, right? A galaxy is like, it's rotating because it has a whole bunch of stars, but there's also like this invisible dark matter halo. And then there are galaxies that are satellite galaxies that are orbiting around it. And then when you look at Andromeda, you can tell that it's moving towards you. What you can't tell is its translational motion. Like how much is it moving left and right? Because that doesn't show up on a spectrograph. The Doppler shift lets you know if a star is moving towards you or away from you, but it doesn't tell you anything about it moving left or right. But so you imagine that there is some like translational velocity there that could just cause, even if it's moving towards us, these galaxies to kind of fly by each other. And so this was a relatively new study, and everybody that has ever made a video about these galaxies colliding has never said anything like that. But that's something that is apparently true, or at least it adds some doubt, some uncertainty into that commonly known fact.
Right, but that doesn't mean all of science is now wrong, right?
Yeah.
And so I think like sometimes the public's misunderstanding of this nuance makes people think that, well, this one thing, and I think this like really reared its head during COVID, right? When there was like new information coming out constantly. Yeah. And so people were just generally doubtful of science because misinformation or information that conflicted with last week's information kept coming out.
Yeah.
And like that's literally how science works. That's how we arrive at a distilled understanding of how the world and the universe works.
Yeah.
And I just wish people like had that baseline, so that we could build off of that.
Yeah, understanding this like it's a constructive and iterative process.
Right.
That never is perfect. Yeah, I couldn't tell you how many times people would say something like, "Oh, you mean?" And think about all the times that science has been wrong, and oh, you mean like how they did with COVID, and we'll like throw that out as evidence that scientists are kind of like just making things up, or that it's like faith based, and it is a little bit faith based.
Right.
I trust science that I don't understand.
Right.
And I'm not
trust that the scientific method has been conducted.
Right? Because that's like the best thing that we can do. Otherwise, you're just getting your information from whatever quantum healer is making videos on TikTok.
Right.
Selling you like
so
whatever.
Then is anyone ever capable of truly being objective?
Is anyone capable of being objective?
Like truly?
No, I think that the philosophical answer there is no, it's not possible. Even information that we can all agree on, we're all agreeing on as humans who are hallucinating about many things, like color. I think we both agree that we're both wearing blue shirts, but like, what does that mean? What is blue? Blue doesn't exist. Blue is not a thing that's out there. Right. It's that the particles on our shirts are roughly a certain size, and wavelengths of light that are close to that size bounce off of it and then hit our eyes. Exactly. Right. And our brain interprets that wavelength of photons as blue. But it's that's like not real, The color in that sense isn't an objective, but we all see that our shirts are blue.
Right. So I guess in a universe where there's no true objectivity, science is the closest.
Well, I don't know if that's true though.
Like
because
relative to human, like
the
human
photons
derived.
are a certain wavelength.
Okay, human derived objectivity, right?
Well, I think that humans can agree that the wavelength of the photons that are bouncing off of our shirt are whatever that wavelength is, and it's should be somewhere around like 450 nanometers or something. And I feel like that's objective, but the fact that our shirts are blue is not.
Right. But like our usage of science is kind of our best attempt at gearing us towards this, right?
100%.
And distilling the truth.
100%.
And I think like that's the thing that as a very young kid fascinated me the most. I think I'll be watching I'd have all these questions, right? I mean, we literally have a show called Curiosity Theory. And I had all these questions that I couldn't find answers to except for in science books. And it just felt like, that's a place where this like level of rigor is being used, and it feels like in the general population, there's like a loss of rigorousness. I feel like we need some more rigor in our lives.
Yeah, we got to bring rigor back to the internet, back to understanding, back to information, back to like the critical assessment of what information, what data is like getting into our minds.
I think it's refreshing. Like, I don't know, like and I think everybody's like social media's algorithms and things are different, but I think it's really refreshing to me when I can see that someone like made an effort, a rigorous effort to distill this information, right? Mm-hmm. And you can kind of tell the difference between, the way that people approach. But I think like people just need like steps though. They don't like most people don't even know how to be rigorous. Like you were saying, like how to even read a peer-reviewed research paper, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's difficult, but yeah, you have to like come up with some way of vetting and checking information. And I mean, I guess that is one way to do it. People will see a video, maybe it won't sound right. They'll be like, I want to hear so-and-so's opinion on it. And in a sense, that is something that you would look for, right? That people are still turning
skeptical
towards experts. Yeah. Mm-hmm. To be like, I myself don't have the expertise, the knowledge, the qualifications to really parse this out and do a considerable job at figuring out whether or not this is believable. But there are people who have that expertise.
Right.
And that's what I do. When I see something in evolutionary biology or neuroscience, I'll ask, a scientist that I know in that field, like, what's the take on here? What's the general consensus? And even then, right, you can get interpretations that vary from person to person. Right. But I think it is your job as an expert to be able to kind of hold all of those positions, be like, well, this is possible. We have evidence to think this, but it could also be this. And I think that as a scientist, you get comfortable with that ambiguity.
Right. Yeah. But I can appreciate that sentiment of, just asking an expert, and not everybody has a scientist in their Rolodex so they can just hit up, right? Like my local marine biologist friend, right? But like asking an expert not what their opinion is, but like what is the general consensus in your field about this particular thing? I think that's an interesting kind of nuanced approach to getting the information. Because you're right. There's variety in expert takes on a particular small fact.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes an expert, an expert's take can be pure speculation. Yeah. Like people ask me, I do these Q&As on my Instagram story, and people inevitably, invariably each time ask me about life in the universe. Do I think it's there? Like, what are the percentages? And if you ask every space expert and every biology expert, you may get thousands of different answers. And that's because there are very few things that we know for certain. And those things that we know for certain are really the only safe assumptions that you can make. Like, people oftentimes will say, well, statistically, life has to be out there. And it's like, we could build a case for a high likelihood of life, but statistically, what we know is that there's one planet. We know of one in the universe.
You have one sample size,
right?
for that.
So it's like 1 over the number of planets. Right. Statistically, we know that for a fact. Is it probably higher than that? Yes, it probably is. But like, we don't have the stats to show that. We have this one example. Now, you could like eliminate the planets outside of our galaxy because we can't really study them meaningfully anyways. And then you could say like, maybe there's 1 or single digits per galaxy. And I feel like that's the safe lower limit of trustable, conservative estimate answer for like how much life. Now, could it be much higher than that? It could be, but we don't know that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, man, I think this is really insightful. Like, I want people to kind of come away from this episode with maybe like some specific approaches, right? So maybe if you could outline this, because I think you touched on it a little bit, but maybe in a step-by-step way. Like, let's say I'm a person that consumes content on the internet. I don't have scientist friends, right? And I see some outrageous claim about hollow moon theory. This guy, I don't know. It seems like it's weird music. There's like a bunch of weird stuff going on here. I might be a little skeptical. But I don't know what to do next. Like, what should I do next as a
I guess you gotta watch out for the red flags. So hearing creepy music, you should already know that you're being primed for like some nonsense, right? Why is there a creepy music track to the background? The person who's talking about it doesn't have like expertise, and I'm not saying that you need to have a PhD about something to talk about that you find interesting. But if this person's like has no kind of demonstrated expertise in that realm at all, then okay, maybe we should dig a little bit deeper. And if there's an article, maybe you could check out the article. And if there's a paper in there, maybe you could check out the paper. But you should be wary of headlines that are very like damning, like, oh, this new observation broke the universe. Do you think that this new observation broke the universe? Does the universe feel broken to you? No. And that's not how you would integrate a new observation into science anyways. A new observation is like, maybe it's telling you something new. Maybe it's telling us that there was a gap. Like, we have this model of the universe, but we have certain gaps, and those gaps need to be filled in. And that's science. That's the iterative process. Mm-hmm. So the more clickbaity something sounds, and the more like wonderful and fantastic and thought-provoking something sounds, probably the more skeptical you should be of it.
Right.
Yeah. And I feel like that's where you should start. And then if you really want to, you can look up expert opinions on a given thing, because they're everywhere.
Where do you
there are
find
people
them?
who write blog posts about it. I mean,
like, how do you know that someone's an expert on that topic in science?
How do you know that someone's an expert
on a specific?
It should be in my opinion, it's demonstrable. If you go to, if you're on a neuroscientist page and they make content about neuroscience and they do neuroscience research and they publish paper, like, they're an expert. And in my opinion, at least outwardly, people should be demonstrable experts in what they're giving expertise on. And if someone doesn't appear to be that, I don't want this to sound like classist or elitist, because that's not what it's about. But you shouldn't be taking, for example, fitness advice on somebody who has no idea about fitness, right? Who has no idea what the literature on fitness is. You shouldn't be taking mental health advice from somebody that has no demonstrable expertise in mental health or therapy or psychology or sociology, right? Like, you've got to be able to discern the source of the information. And I mean, you have to be able to do that on your own.
Right. And yeah, I think it's an interesting time, because there's so much information. There's a lot of stuff out there, and maybe if people can take some of these tools and add them to their toolkit, they'll be less easily swayed. Right? They'll remain skeptical, thoughtful, and critical observers of the universe.
100%. And you always, I feel like that's me. I always am gonna try to err on the side of skepticism, even if we're having a conversation. I'm gonna start trying to like challenge what you're saying, not in a you're wrong, I'm right type of way, but it's like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? What are the holes here?
Yeah,
what doesn't hold up? What doesn't stand up?
And I think we both do that. And I think it sharpens, like through discourse, our dialogue is sharpened, right? And maybe we'll walk away with a new understanding or a new thought pattern about like what we originally thought. So I think that's also productive as long as it doesn't devolve, which I think also can happen.
It always happens because we also get very much attached to the things that we think. They become like part of our belief system and our identity. And then when you challenge me, it feels like you're attacking me.
Right.
And then I got to attack you back.
Right. But that's not how scientists think about it, right? When I'm criticizing your research paper as a fellow scientist, as a fellow astrophysicist, right? Like I am sharpening your output. I'm making you a better scientist.
Yeah. And an interesting thing to piggyback off that as we wrap up is that in the acknowledgments section of many research papers, often this is true for the papers that I write, I tend to thank, and many people do this, thank the reviewers for their feedback because it makes the paper better. They saw things that could be beefed up, that could be made more clear, and when you address them, it makes your science more, your analysis more robust. It makes your conclusions more believable, and it makes them stick more. And so, like, that is the general sentiment among scientists, although there is, like, heated debate between people at times. But generally, you know, that constructive nature is something that is more so heralded than, like, shied away from or ignored.
Word. So I got some great takeaways, man. We got to critically analyze information, err on the side of skepticism, right? Like try to find a credentialed history of output in the field of an expert when they're making these outrageous claims. And if something is more outrageous, maybe, you know, err on the side of caution when you start to incorporate that into your belief system.
Always, yeah. Slow, hire with ideas. I feel like you got to hire slow. Just don't wholesale. Yeah, hire slow, fire fast. If you got some crappy ideas, something that's not holding up, like you got to be okay to let that go. But like adopt your ideas slowly. You know, there's like no rush.
Yeah, that's a great note for us to end on.
This is very opposite of what it means to go viral.
Yeah, it's antithetical to that.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, but everything that's viral isn't what's best for you. So I think that's a great note for us to end on. And hopefully you all have learned some things about how to address the science illiteracy epidemic that we are dealing with right now.